Don Carpenter on Newsradio 1270 and 106.7 FM KIML.
Newsradio 1270 and 106.7 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back for the final hour. It's 9:07, and we're going to go right to the phones, and we actually have a special guest returning for the first time in a few months, U.S. Senate candidate Tom Del Becarro. Good morning.
Hey, how are you today? Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's been a while since we talked to you. Of course, you're running for Senate in California, and the last time we talked to you, of course, we talked about your book, The Divided Era, which I actually checked it out after we talked, and it's a great book. I mean, it really is.
Thank you.
It really is very eye-opening. But first off, welcome back, and thanks a lot for talking to us this morning. Of course, you scored a key endorsement for your campaign. So why don't we start off by talking a little bit about that?
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the plug about the divided era. You know, the larger government becomes, the greater the competition between citizens for spoils, and the more divided we are, and that's certainly where we're headed. And one of the things I advocate in the book is to reduce government power and division, is to get away from this class warfare mentality of our politicians, a lot of which is fed by the tax system. Our tax code features an imbalanced system where if you're rich and powerful, you get deductions, and if you're not so rich and powerful, you don't. And the worse that gets, we have a 77,000-page annotated tax code. The worse that gets, the more divided we become. So I've been an advocate for a flat tax for about 30 years. And I was pleased this week in my candidacy. Actually, I named Stephen Moore of Heritage and formerly of Club for Growth in the Wall Street Journal, has been my lead economic advisor. I announced that several months ago. And then this past week, I was honored to have Larry Kudlow's endorsement as well. They, too, are both two big proponents of the flat tax because of the economic renewal it would bring, but also they're very concerned as well about this pitting of some Americans against others.
Well, and that's why I kind of wanted to talk to you today, because, I mean, this is it's not your everyday flat tax program. And I know, we've all probably heard a few different plans from time to time. This one's a little bit different, though, isn't it?
Well, it is. Mine's actually a true flat tax as opposed to some of the other plans like a Donald Trump who claims he's getting closer to a flat tax, but again is picking winners and losers with multiple rates depending on the type of income and who you are. And mine's pretty simple. There's a 15.5% rate for all businesses with immediate expensing. And what that means is we have a complicated tax code for businesses. And some things you can deduct the year that you buy them, other things you have to depreciate. For the vast majority of businesses, that's a difficult enterprise because they don't specialize in that. And I've represented small businesses. I'm a small business attorney. I've been for 28 years. And if you own a small business, and I talked to one just yesterday about this, about halfway through the year, Don, you get this situation where you start wondering, am I paying enough taxes quarterlies, and am I going to get hit with a tax bill? But the average human being is not capable of making that assessment. And so they have to contact accountants, and they worry about these things. But under my plan, it's enormously simple. You swap out your accountant for Quicken. And what you do is you go into your Quicken program and say, income for the year, expenses for the year. And then you'll see how much money you will need to pay taxes or whether your quarterlies are enough. And you don't have to worry. Why this is important is because at that point you can plan. You can decide, okay, I'm in a good position, I can buy something else, or I'm in a bad position, I need to allocate more for taxes. By removing the uncertainty, you can be more proactive in your business. It's a great planning tool. So it's a 15.5% for businesses, large and small, immediate expensing. You buy a truck for your business that year, you expense it that year, no depreciation schedules to worry about. And then for individuals, it's the same 15.5% regardless of income, except for a family of four would pay no income tax on the first $48,000. So that way you have an opportunity to not be taxed right away on your initial income, and you wouldn't be taxed until later on.
Okay, so now, and you know, we've heard we've heard other plans before as far as flat taxes. Where did you come up with the 15.5 number?
Well, interesting that you ask, because what you want is a system that, to begin with, in the transition is relatively neutral with regard to the amount of revenues that will be raised. You don't want to put in a system that would increase the deficit by any sizable amount initially. And so when you combine all the features of my plan, which includes the removal of the cap on payroll taxes, so that all people who are getting wages pay at the same level. That removes the whole Warren Buffett argument about the rich pay at a different rate than the poor. Again, we don't want to pick winners and losers. All people should be treated the same. So in part, the 15.5 relates to revenue neutrality in the overall system, but it's also a recognition of the fact that there was a poll last year by Reason Roop that showed that 62% of Americans, and I talked about this in my book, The Divided Era, 62% of Americans, and I don't mean voters, I don't mean registered voters, I don't mean likely voters, I don't mean Republicans, I don't mean conservatives, of America as a whole, believe that a flat tax at 15% is reasonable. So when I designed this system with my economic advisor, Stephen Moore, we had a recognition of approximately where people believed it should be and took that into consideration in creating a revenue-neutral version of our flat tax.
So it's almost like the old Laffer curve where there's a certain point where people just won't put up with the taxes anymore, right?
Yeah, well, long before Laffer, even Calvin Coolidge said taxes that are too high won't be paid. And it's a question of restoring incentives. You know, the American left says that, if you lower tax rates, it really doesn't affect incentives, but they're very disingenuous about that. And let me explain to you why. I know that when you lower rates, the economy responds. That happened in the 20s when we lowered rates. It happened in the 60s after Kennedy suggested lower rates because it would restore incentives. Happened under Reagan, and it happened after the 2003 cuts were fully implemented just over a decade ago. But the left, again, says, well, it doesn't do that. But yet they're willing to do sin taxes. And what they suggest to you is if you tax something high enough, cigarettes, soda, you name it, alcohol, people will use less of it. In fact, in England at one point, there was a big tax on gin because people were drinking too much gin. And they raised it and kept raising it to the point where there was a reduction, they thought, in alcoholism related to that. So they believe in sin taxes, although they're addicted, politicians are, to the taxes that are collected from it. They will make the argument that sin taxes reduce that, but they don't apply that to income as if it's somehow different. And if I could, just a minute to show you how easily these incentive works. Take a company, a massive company like Macy's. Macy's regularly has sales, and they regularly send out catalogs and emails to their customers saying, this Friday, save 20%. You know what happens? People don't go in on Thursday. They go in on Friday because they know if they go in on Friday, they could save $20, $30.
Oh, yeah.
They've trained people to do this. They've trained me. I don't buy anything full price at Macy's.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that. I'm sorry to interrupt. When I was much, much younger, I actually worked at Macy's, and back then, I don't know if this was 25 years ago, they did a two-week cycle where they would have a sale one week, they wouldn't have the sale the next week, they'd have a sale the next week, and they just rotated on and off, and nobody would buy the stuff because they knew it would be on sale the next week. So you're exactly right with the Macy's comparison was perfect.
And just that small incentive gets human beings to change their behavior. Yet somehow the left says, and thank you for giving me your real-life example of it.
Yeah.
Yet the left says if we reduce rates where people could be incentivized to save thousands, that they won't change their behavior. That's ridiculous. And so lowering rates, history is, as I say, littered with examples of when you lower rates and economies rebound. And in fact, our four major income tax rate reductions in our history all were enacted while the economy was weak. Each time the economy turned around, in fact, our first major one was after the income tax came in at 7% at a top rate. How's that sound? Within 2.5 years, the Woodrow Wilson administration, Democrats had pushed the top rate to 77%. And lo and behold, there was a recession a year later. That rate was then cut to 25, and we had the roaring 20s. So rate reductions work. We expect with my program that there would be a significant expansion in the economy. You'd get more people. We have a third of Americans on mean-tested welfare. We have the lowest labor force participation rate. All of that is bad. If once you reduce rates and consumer demand goes up, right now consumer demand is middling and it varies month and quarter to quarter. If you have a sustained growth in consumer demand because they're paying less taxes, then business expands, they start hiring people, and we can get America back on track again.
Well, now, and all of this, all obviously, it's remaining revenue neutral. I mean, your plan doesn't
Eventually, it will raise revenues.
Okay, so
significantly.
Now, how about the spending side of this? I mean, does this address this at all, or is that something that you'll do separately?
That's a separate item, and it's always important because the left's trick is to say, "Oh, tax rate reductions increase the deficit." That's not true. Tax rate reductions have always increased revenues. The problem is irresponsible spending that outpaces the revenue increases, and that's always been true. I mean, keep in mind, when Reagan said government's not the solution to our problems, government is the problem, government was 1/3 the size it is today. We have record federal revenues even today in this weak economy of $3.2 trillion, yet we're still going to have a $600 billion deficit. Why? Because politicians are obsessed with spending, even though, and that a lot of that has to do, by the way, with entitlements. Today, federal discretionary spending, the part that they vote on year to year as opposed to the Social Security and Medicare type programs which are on autopilot, discretionary spending today, 2015, is at 2008 levels. And that's very rare in our history. But nevertheless, government continues to grow because of the entitlement process. And we don't have enough people working to balance the budget. We have to get people working and the economy growing in order to balance this budget or make significant reductions in the Social Security and Medicare. My plan addresses getting people to work.
Okay, now one of the other things that this plan also addresses that I don't really see a whole lot in some of the other plans eliminating all tariffs, as well as the Obamacare taxes and the death tax, which a lot of people have proposed plans to get rid of. But the tariffs, again, that speaks to the whole picking winners and losers thing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And by the way, the plan, you can get it if you go to politicalvanguard.com. On the left-hand side, you'll see where it says My Plan, or if you go directly to Forbes and under my name, Tom Del Becarro, you can find it. Listen, tariffs has always been about winners and losers. The worst example in our history fueled part of the Civil War, because we had an all-tariff system. There was no income tax, right, in the 1800s. And what happened was the North, which had more powerful politicians than the South in Congress, the North, because the North had more people, by about, I think I mentioned in the book, by about 17 million to 11 million, roughly. The North enacted this system where there were tariffs that benefited the northern manufacturers and hurt all consumers, and that meant the South paid up to 75% of all the tariff taxes in America, and that was picking a winner and loser, breeded a lot of resentment. Tariffs today are all about winners and losers. What industries are protected where you raise the price for the American manufacturer, and that hurts trade. Now, some people will say it protects American jobs. True, if you put a tariff on, pick something, Henry Hazlitt, the famous economist who wrote the book Economics in One Lesson, talks about sweaters. If you put a $5 tariff on all incoming sweaters, so that American sweaters, which say cost $30 and imported sweaters cost $25, if you make them the same price, you will protect sweater manufacturers. But what you do in the process is you take $5 more out of every consumer's product, and so he has $5 less, and he can't spend it on shoes, and he can't spend it on refrigerators, and he can't spend it on food, and so everybody else's economy is reduced by that $5, and you will have picked a winner and a loser. And most importantly, tariffs result in less trade overseas. We're one of the biggest exporters in the world, so when we impose a tariff, the other side imposes a tariff back, and trade overall is reduced. By eliminating tariffs, you create greater trade, and you will see a boom in American exports.
Now, and this is actually now. How about some of the other countries that have really strict protectionist? I mean, that would have to be dealt with separately, I imagine, right?
Well, I'm glad you're asking these questions, because this is the difference between free trade and not. Take a look at, this goes all the way back to Adam Smith saying countries should produce, wealth of nations should produce what they do best and trade with those that don't. I mean, I'm an attorney. I don't make shoes. What I can do is help people start up a business. They pay me money, and then I pay money to the person who can make shoes. The same applies with regard to national economies. We now are the best service industry, banking, insurance, high tech in the world, and we trade that to other countries who produce oil and other things. That's how you're supposed to get trade. And Milton Friedman long ago used to tell us that if Germany is going to tax its own citizens to build a car for us at a cheaper rate so we can buy it cheaper, we should not feel bad about that, because then our consumers over here benefit, spend less on cars, and are able to buy more domestic products. And so we should not be as concerned with some of these countries that are subsidizing their own industries to sell us cheaper products. Now, what does that mean? If a country blocks the importation of, for years, American butter was kept out of European markets, we should work vigorously to convince them to reduce the amount for them to buy American products. And that is a function of what the Commerce Department, the President, and the Secretary of State should be doing. But just because they're hurting their own country doesn't mean we should hurt our consumers by doing parallel tariffs, because that leads to a trade war, and that was one of the big reasons we had the Great Depression.
Well, and I'm glad you explained it like that. The way I've always seen this is, say, use the German car example. Once they see how well we're doing without the tariffs, if they're smart, they'll lower theirs.
Yeah, remember, if we sell goods to England, they get American dollars. The only thing they can do with American dollars is to buy something. They can't actually, you can't, if you're a business in England, you get an American dollar, you can't go use American dollars. You have to buy back from some other country, and that's what increases international trade. So high tariffs are bad for everyone. There's always been tariffs, but if tariffs are reduced, you have much higher international trade. You have these more interconnected economies. It's better for consumers. The hard thing with tariffs and taxes and all of these things is you can see, and Henry Hazlitt used to talk about this all the time, you can see the immediate benefit to the one person, but you don't see the corresponding detriment to everybody else, to all other consumers, to the rest of America. So, for instance, our tax code, 77,000 pages, has a tax exemption for somebody like Solyndra, right? Solyndra got a better deal for, this is just a made-up example. Solyndra would get a better, well, this isn't made up. The benefits that go to renewable energy are enormous compared to that goes to fossil fuels, right? The subsidies. Everybody says, great, that helps Solyndra. But it helps at a cost to someone else, because if they're getting a dollar benefit, then someone is getting a dollar detriment. And no one talks about the person who gets the detriment. They just stand in with whoever gets the benefit, and that's bad.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you explained it like that, because I mean I think that's it's a good way to point out. I mean, this is all about winners and losers, and it's the hand of the market. The old Adam Smith thing, and the hand of the market. If you put handcuffs on it, it's not going to be able to do anything.
No, the more trade barriers. So look, one of the reasons we got into the Great Depression, most people don't realize that after the stock market crashed, the double-digit unemployment had fallen back down, and then Hoover raised income tax rates from 25 to 63% at the top. They enacted Smoot-Hawley, which was a big tariff trade act, and that's when the economy really, really tanked. And then the Federal Reserve made it worse by letting the money supply reduce by 32%. And then FDR raised the top rate to 94. And that's what really caused the Great Depression. It was bad policies, and we shouldn't go down that road again. We should be removing tariffs and increasing trade. The richest countries in history have been the greatest traders, we in America have always emphasized the plight have talked about, or the left has always talked about how imports hurt us, as opposed to recognizing the value to exports. There's over 12 million or 13, 14 million jobs in America that are dependent on exporting, and a lot of them are small businesses, and we need to recognize that tariffs hurt them. Well,
and of course, we only have a few more minutes left here before I have to take a break, but of course, for all of this to happen, it would have to be passed. Oh, one thing we should mention, since I was going to mention that it would be passed by Congress. Also, any change to this system, once it's put in place, would require a 3/5 vote. So we're talking, it wouldn't be easy to just go back to the old way of doing things as well.
Yeah, no, we don't want it so it can simply be raised back up. So let's make a higher requirement that Congress can impose on itself.
Okay, so of course this would require you are running for Senate. It would require you to win. You've gotten a key endorsement from Larry Kudlow. Have you heard anything from anyone else that's already in the Senate that this would be something that they would be able to support?
No, I haven't actually gone that route. We're building wider support outside of Congress first before we progress.
Okay, well, and of course, I did mention it's funny. Funny, we actually had a caller from California, so we do have a few people listening in your neck of the woods. That
well, I posted it on Facebook. Hopefully, someone is listening.
Oh, well, that would explain why we had callers from California today. Then, but I want to thank you for doing that. It was probably one of the better calls we've had in quite a while. It was very interesting. But of course, you are running for Senate. Becarro for Senate.com is your website. Just give us maybe a 1 or 2 minute wrap up on this, on why this is such a good idea.
We need a flat tax for 3 reasons. One, it will increase the size of the economy by restoring incentives. We have too little growth. You hear about income inequality. Really what's going on is that the bottom 90% of America, or most of America, are losing income over the last 7 years. On average, they've lost $1,600. If you're under 35, it's even worse. And so we need a dynamic, growing economy so that there's more opportunity, not the stagnation. That's number one. Number two, we have to get away from class warfare. We can't have a system that can be gained by some over others. Usually that means the rich over the poor. Every complexity in the law helps the rich at the expense of the poor because they can help to figure it out. Class warfare never works for the poor. It just works for some politicians. We need a growing economy so people have greater opportunity. And finally, a flat tax takes power away from the IRS because they have less to interpret, less that they can do like a Lois Lerner, and we can shrink government. And Republicans and conservatives need to make the case that you can have a better, more vibrant America with less government, and a flat tax is the clearest way to do that. It's achievable, and we can do it in 2017.
Well, I wish you luck on it. I mean, I like it. I'm sure it would be very popular in this neck of the woods as well. I wish you the best, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoy coming back on. Thanks so much.
It's always a pleasure. Again, Tom Del Becarro for Senate.com. If you're listening in California, vote for the guy. I'm telling you, it's pretty good stuff. PoliticalVanguard.com is also his other website. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. News Radio 1270, 106.7 KIML.
You're listening to Don Carpenter on News Radio 1270 and 106.7 FM KIML.